So, apparently, Shadow Priest is going to be a thing soon, and Warlock almost had a different hero power, and dual class cards are probably coming back. Those are just a few of the things we learned over the last 24 hours in the Iksar AMA that he just posted on Twitter. He shared a lot of design insights, stuff on the history of Hearthstone, and I thought we'd break down some of the most interesting news that came out of it. It's nothing super significant, but some interesting tidbits and clues that we can kind of unwrap and unravel to see if we can figure out what they mean. And then also just a lot of interesting design and balance decisions and insights as well. All right, so up first, let's talk about Shadow Priest. Someone asked Dean about mean or not nice mechanics with Priest, got a little snarky, and then went in to describe Priest's toolkit as being random generation, healing, tempo curve gameplay. I think that means things like minion buffs and dragons, as he specifies, and then traditional control. Of course, those all make sense. But then the very interesting tidbit is that we're also going to re-explore what Shadow Priest means, which is sort of a different direction I think a lot of players will like. So, of course, Shadow Priest, before we've had things like Shadow Reaper Anduin. We certainly have Shadow word cards like Death and Pain. But I think like Shadow Reaper Anduin and Shadow Form, of course, that altered your hero power were the most Shadow Priesty things, which were about dealing damage with your hero power. This suggests it's going to go in a different direction. So what do you think Shadow Priest is going to look like in Hearthstone? I'm really curious to hear ideas you have for how it could go. I would like to see something like a damage over time style effect, but I'm sure there's a handful of different ways you guys can think to explore Shadow Priesty sort of mechanics. So I'm looking forward to reading your thoughts in the comments below, because apparently Shadow Priest is indeed on the way sooner rather than later. All right, so now let's talk about dual class. Somebody asked Dean his favorite keyword. He says there's a good chance we'll revisit dual class. I honestly wonder if Hearthstone would be more fun if it was permanently dual class. Would have to revisit some balance to do it, but it's a great mechanic. Very unlikely this will happen, just a curiosity I have. So he says there's a good chance, and it's unlikely. I think there's a good chance that means they'll have some dual class and expansions, but it won't become a permanent aspect of Hearthstone. That's the unlikely part, although he's intrigued by it. And you know what? I totally agree. I love dual class. I think it was an absolute flavor home run in Skullman's Academy. The cards just fit and look and feel like they just match up perfectly. I'd like to see different dual class combinations as well. I know we've had some really, really cool dual class custom cards. You guys explored a ton of design space there already. So let's hope this one comes to Hearthstone again. So this is pretty crazy. Dean talking about cards that came close to being nerfed. So Gadget's and Auctioneer dodged some nerfs for a while until it eventually did go up in mana cost. That makes sense. It used to be an engine in a ton of decks back in the day. And then Malygos was on the Hall of Fame list 2 to 3 times, but always slipped through. I have a feeling Edwin was probably in similar spots. And that makes sense. Malygos has always felt like a card that creates all kinds of problems and is hard to design around. I'm sure Hearthstone has changed a lot because Malygos existed. And then I think the most interesting aspect here is that early on they discussed the idea of changing the Warlock hero power, but they never found a good idea for a replacement. And I think that's so interesting because it still, to me, feels like Warlock's hero power really is the strongest hero power. And to an extent such that Warlock, if you look, I think often gets weaker class cards. Of course, they've had a few that were amazing through the years, obviously. But for much of a Warlock's lifespan in Hearthstone, it's utilized strong neutral cards in a zoo package to succeed. I wonder if the hero power has really changed the design on Warlock such that it's hard to make good cards just because Warlock does have that endless draw opportunity. That's intriguing. It does feel to me so much stronger than the other hero powers. So this is intriguing, talking about Hearthstone's generation problem, as some people would put it. Just too many discover effects and generation effects where it feels like your deck or your resources don't have as much impact. Specifically, this person mentions in aspect of lackeys. And Dean says, if we could have gone back and cut the Dragon Discover and placed with something else, I think meaning the Draconic Lackey, that they probably would have liked to, because there's just a little bit too much generation, even in the design team's eyes as well. And next year we should see less random generation than we have now, or discover generation, etc. Which I think that's really, really good, because I like resources to matter. I like the density of your deck to matter. Like right now, just playing a control deck is hard sometimes, because if there's something like a really fast aggro rogue can still make infinite resources, you can't grind people out. You can't just win the game by controlling the resources, because they just keep making more and more and more. And lackeys have certainly contributed to that problem, particularly like discovering giant crazy dragons that sometimes generate more resources. It's just this endless chain. So that's a good sign. I think Hearthstone will be in a better place if we get less generation and we go back to resources mattering. So it turns out animated Broomstick almost got nerfed. It says was probably the closest card to getting nerfed that didn't. It was discussed, and it's still under the microscope, but they think it has some interesting aspects that makes Hearthstone feel different. For instance, Dean says he thinks it's fun and unique, but giving anything rush can certainly have its downsides. As somebody who got owned by an evolved shaman using an animated broomstick today, I'm leaning towards the nerf side of things. It just does a lot for a single 1/1, and tons of decks are running it. And I think still Hearthstone has a little bit too much rush, much like we just talked about with random generation. Sometimes initiative doesn't matter when everything has rush. So trying to stick big minions doesn't matter if your opponent can just deal with them easily. They very rarely actually present much threat, which really changes the shape of Hearthstone. Whereas in the past, just getting a big minion down and having initiative would be hard for opponents to keep up with. So reactivity is good in general in Hearthstone, but too much can feel bad, because it really limits the kinds of decks and plays that unfold. So Broom does contribute to that a little bit too much, and I wouldn't mind a little bit of a Broom nerf. All right, so this is a fun one. What's your favorite mechanic or card that never quite had enough power to see much competitive play? And Iksar says, talking about hand buff today, in the case of Inspire, it was weak on purpose. We weren't sold on the gameplay and didn't have the time to redesign completely, so it felt safer to not put too much power into it. That's a crazy insight, because for a long time, Inspire has felt like the most failed keyword, perhaps up there with Overkill, but it seemed like Inspire was even like more central to its expansion in the Grand Tournament, and it made the Grand Tournament kind of flop, which I don't think you want when your game is still in a big upswing. So I wonder how much that hurt Hearthstone. I think they could have pushed it just a little more with 1 or 2 cards. It sounds like they didn't think it was that great of a gameplay experience as much as anything else, so they didn't want to push it too hard, which is intriguing. But some real insights here into the history of why Inspire seemed to fail. And then on the other side of things, with hand buff, it sounds like it was really a balance miss. They liked the gameplay aspect of it, but they just didn't push it enough. They didn't tweak it up enough to be good. They think the legendary should have probably been better. I think they're talking about our good buddy, what's his name? Don Honcho? Yeah, I think they're talking about Don Honcho, and encouraging having more hand buff cards as opposed to a standalone design. And then finally, one other card he liked, and maybe not an entire mechanic, but kind of, was Void Ripper. And that was a really cool card. I liked Void Ripper as one that flipped everybody's stats on board. That had some interesting implications. Didn't really get played much, but definitely a fun design. So few insights there. Hand buff has failed over and over again, so it seems like they keep getting the numbers wrong on this one. I think you have to have bigger stats or rush to go with it, or something to make it more immediate and more impactful, because even with hand buff cards today, they still seem like they don't quite hit the mark. And we've had a few different runs at this one now. All right, so those were most of the like card and mechanic and design topics. Now we've got like some system stuff and like future modes and those sorts of things. This one in particular talking about making Hearthstone accessible. And Dean says, basically, we want the game to be as accessible as possible. Hearthstone's actually pretty complicated in the scheme of things. We'd like to have more modes like Battlegrounds that are a click a button and play. In other words, like, you want to get into Constructed, you got to go build your deck. You got to just, figure out what you're doing there. It takes forever to actually get in the game. Battlegrounds, you hit play. You don't have to build the deck. You don't have to bring anything with you. It's just ready to go. And I find that a really interesting topic. I agree with Dean. Like, I love that aspect of Battlegrounds. It's just like, get it, go, you're ready to go. You don't even need to have a collection. It's just sit down and play. And I think that's really welcoming for people. It's great for newcomers. It's great for people who are playing on a budget, all these sorts of things. But I find it interesting because Duels just hit, and Duels is like the exact opposite of that. Duels, you have to build a deck. Duels, you have to have a big enough collection to unlock the hero powers. Duels has a cost of entry with gold if you want to play heroic instead of casual duels. Of course, you can do both. So depending on the level there's like 3 or more barriers to entry to get you into Duels. Whereas Duels would have been a great opportunity for a plug and play game mode where you just sit down, they give you a base starter deck, and then you refine your deck utilizing the treasures you get in between, but you could just jump right into the first game with no treasures and a pre-built deck. Even unlike Arena where you'd have to draft the deck, you wouldn't even necessarily have to do that in Duels. So it's interesting to hear these sorts of comments right after a new game mode came out. I wonder if Duels was already just like so baked in that they hadn't really reached this sort of philosophy yet, or if the next game mode is going to be more like this where it's just sit down and play. But it's intriguing because I feel like Duels missed an opportunity to be exactly that sort of thing. I feel like you could just jump right into a Duels game if they built it that way, but they didn't. They put all these barriers and speed bumps and roadblocks in between you and the most ideal experience. Interesting. I hope this is a trend that is followed in the future in game modes, and we don't get another one like Duels with so many things in the way. All right, so this topic here is about the dust economy and how hard it is to get back into the game, get cards, because dust is pretty light on the return when you disenchant things. And let's break down Iksar's response here. The goal is to make it feel like new, returning, and current. It's easy for you to get in and have fun playing Hearthstone with minimal, if any, investment. Investment beyond that should be because you were already having fun and have learned enough to want more. We're always working on that. We could do a lot better with new and returning players, especially making some changes there in the future, but no details right now. So I don't really think there's much to break down here, sadly. I wanted to include this basically to say, this kind of means there's probably not a dust change coming anytime soon. This is more of a stated goal. This is kind of like brushing off the question, I think. It does say, maybe some changes there in the future. So that's promising, but that to me is the kind of language that implies a really long time away. Now, don't take this out on Iksar. It's certainly not his fault. It's not his decision. Those sorts of things probably live far above his head. He's, design guy, not a economy or monetization sort of guy, I don't think. So I appreciate him responding at all. He could have just ignored this one. It's pretty much a non-answer, it feels like, but at least he's tackling it. I respect that. It's just not exactly what we want to hear. It sounds like maybe something small in the distant future is the best we can hope for right now, which kind of sucks. All right, so quick question here about Duels, basically asking if Duels is going to change and the next theme for Duels. No tease for the theme. I thought it would just be Darkmoon Faire because the last one was Skullomance. I assumed the next one would be Darkmoon Faire. I didn't think they'd have predefined themes. Maybe wrong about that. But he confirms here what we thought was already to be true, or at least I thought was going to be true, is that the cards and the sets those cards are from that are available in Duels will change, which is unfortunate, honestly, because that just means that somebody who crafted wild cards for Duels, the wild cards they crafted aren't necessarily going to be in the next Duels Rotation, which means they kind of wasted those cards if they're only playing Duels, and they're going to have to craft new wild cards to fit into the next Duels Rotation, which has been one of my biggest criticisms for Duels monetization from the beginning. That's really, really punishing to have a separate, shorter length rotation. Your cards aren't going to last nearly as long. So unless you're already somebody playing Wild, it's just really, really tough for you to keep up. So here is a chat about tournament mode. And we talked about this on stream pretty recently. So what happened in tournament mode? I think I actually had this in a video recently too, right? Tournament mode was high profile because we announced it, but the reason was simple and not so abnormal. The reason it was canceled or canned, that is. We explored a robust new feature, playtested, couldn't find something we felt was quality to release. took a hard look at it and estimated what it would take to change all the things that needed to be changed, estimated what we'd have to give up on to spend the resources to accomplish that. Wasn't worth it to us at the time. Cut the feature to explore other ideas. So, we've kind of tossed around some conspiracies for why tournament mode might be canceled. Dean says it's pretty simple. It just wasn't good enough, and to make it better, it was going to have ripple effects. Basically, they'd have to compromise somewhere else. So whether that be some other mode or expansion designs or whatever it is, money, I don't know, right? But you know what? I'm actually willing to take that as a pretty good excuse for tournament mode being canceled. It doesn't seem like a particularly complex thing to me to like set up or get it working, or I don't know why it would take so many resources, but I don't have that visibility. I'm not going to try to speculate into why it was so hard or what went wrong or what needed to be fixed. But if we got other things instead of tournament mode, that's probably a win, because I don't think tournament mode's like the most important thing for Hearthstone to survive. I think there's some upsides to it. I'd love to do it. I'd love to have, sub tournaments and stuff on stream. That'd be great. But if other things, like say we got Battlegrounds, or I don't think that's the case, because I think Tournament Go got canceled way before Battlegrounds, but you get the idea. If we're getting other things instead of it, Tavern Balls or more cards or whatever it is, that's a win. I'd rather have those in many cases than tournament mode. So it's a sad loss. I obviously wish there were more resources to get these things in the game. But it doesn't sound like it's coming back. He didn't like tease it here. It's like, well, but we're revisiting it or anything like that even. So it sounds like tournament mode for now is still very dead. And that said, I think that wraps it up here for my AMA coverage here with the Iksar tweets. There were a lot more questions he didn't get to. I mean, he only did it for an hour. Frankly, I think it's pretty heroic to even step in for an hour. Iksar gets a lot of hate on Twitter. People are mean half the time he tweets anything. So just putting himself out there answering questions, even if it's not stuff we want to hear, even if it's things that we don't agree with, even if you think Iksar's made mistakes in the past or whatever it is, like, still, I think you should respect that he's putting himself out there and answering what he can. It's nice to have a little bit of extra communication from the Hearthstone design team. And there were some really cool insights here, some nice histories and looks back at Hearthstone. So I enjoyed this a lot personally. I think it was really, really cool for Iksar to do this one and give us a chance to cover it here on YouTube as well. That said, curious to hear everybody's thoughts on these things. What did you like? What did you hate? What did you think these things mean? I'm going to learn a lot from the comments below. So thanks for sharing your thoughts down there. And thanks much for watching. And until next time, game on.